Thanks for allowing me. Thanks for a great meal. You know, we don't always get good food when we go out. My compliments to the chef. It was very, very good. I'm glad to be at All Saints Parish. Glad to be invited to the men's club, and I'm glad there's so many women in the men's club. I don't usually like going to men's clubs, but I'm more of a woman guy myself. So we've got some beautiful women here tonight, and I appreciate them coming out. I will try and take a few minutes and talk a little bit about what I would hope you would want to hear about, but I want to leave a lot of time for questions, because I'd rather hear from you about what's on your mind than me trying to think in my mind what it is you ought to hear. However, if you don't ask any questions, I can make a 45-minute boring speech at the drop of a hat. Excuse me. I say that to encourage you to please ask questions when I open the floor for you. This has been an interesting 90 days in the United States Senate. Any honest person assessing the Senate of the United States over the last 3 years would say we've been a do-nothing, atrophied body that hasn't accomplished anything for the American people. And sadly, I'd have to say they're pretty much right. A lot of that's because of the leadership of Harry Reid, but a lot of it's because of some of the leadership on our side. But something happened January 1st. It's a new day, at least this year in America. The Senate is actually getting something done. On New Year's Day at 2:30 in the morning, I was voting on the floor of the United States Senate for a bipartisan agreement on making the taxes in America permanent for 99.1% of the American people, ensuring the equalization of the capital gains tax and the dividend tax, protecting the $5 million exemption per person on the estate tax, and capping the estate tax at a maximum of 40% rather than 55%. In other words, the Senate did something on January 1st at 2:30 in the morning that it had been unable to do for 13 consecutive years. And that is make tax policy in America permanent, so you know what your taxes are, not just today, but tomorrow. And if they ever change, Congress has got to do it by a vote. We've been creating all these fiscal cliffs where we'll sunset the tax code in 10 years or 5 years or 2 years. So you never really quite have the certainty. And we finally gave it some certainty, and that was a good thing. My father always told me when I was growing up, nothing good happens on New Year's Eve after midnight. For 67 years, I agreed with him until this year. But something good happened after midnight because we finally brought some certainty on tax policy. Then something else good happened this past week. The United States Senate passed a continuing resolution and 3 appropriation bills, something we had not done in 3.5 years. We actually did what we're supposed to do constitutionally, and we did it within the budget caps of 2012, which meant we didn't grow expenditure in the government, we actually cut it. And then on Saturday morning at 5 a.m., I cast my last vote on a budget in the United States Senate. The United States Senate has not had a budget in 4 years. And the budget is what I want to talk about a little bit today, because the budget is a document where each party tells you what it is they plan to do for the next 10 years. How much they would plan to spend, how much they would plan to tax, what programs they'd do away with, what programs they'd start. The House is a dominant Republican body right now, controlled by the Republicans. The Senate is controlled by the Democrats. Let me run down the differences in the 2 budgets. The House budget was $46 trillion over 10 years. The Senate budget was $41 trillion over 10 years. The House budget actually reduced taxes in certain areas. The Senate budget, the House budget raised taxes by $965 billion. The Senate budget cut federal spending over the 10-year period of time. The House budget added another $5 trillion in spending. You get my drift? One body was raising more, spending more, and taxing more. One body was trying to live within its means. Excuse me, and that therein lies the problem in this country. Our government has got to make up its mind if it's going to do what the American people have had to do over the last 5 or 6 years, or if it's going to continue to spend without any governance, without any oversight, and without any conservatism. And if we spend too much, the future for my children and grandchildren and yours is not nearly as bright. I tell everybody, I said this in my commercials. My campaign manager, Chris Carr, is here. I'm my chief of staff. He's heard me say it before. I don't want to leave this country and my children and grandchildren worse off than my parents left me. But I am a member of the first generation that could do that unless we get our arms around spending, our arms around taxation, and our arms around governance. Then the way we cut our spending and the way we reduce our growth and our deficit and our debt is by doing some pretty tough things. You can't just do it by cutting spending. I'll give you a little analogy, a true comparison. I want you to remember this. Next time you play trivia, you can use this in trivia and win every time. Everybody says if y'all had just stopped spending, you wouldn't have this huge $16 trillion debt and $1.2 trillion deficit. Well, the last year and the last 12 months of the last fiscal year, the Congress in discretionary spending, which meant all the operations of government, spent $1,182 billion. The deficit was $1,200 billion. Meaning if we had canceled the entire United States government for a year, we'd still been $18 billion short of having a balanced budget. And you might look at me like you're doing and say, that doesn't make any sense at all. Because only 1/3 of the money we spend is spent by budgeting and appropriating and discretionary spending. 2/3 of it are mandatory entitlements. Let me tell you what they are. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SSI disability, federal retirees retirement, federal military retirement, SSI disability, food stamps, and aid to family and dependent children. All of those programs are programs that are spent by formula, not by congressional act. Last year, while we had a $1,182 billion discretionary budget, we had a $2.5 trillion entitlement budget. Entitlements continue to grow exponentially. We're going to have to bite the bullet and reform those entitlements. And we can do it. We've got a window of opportunity to be able to do it. And if we do it, we can return our country to greatness. Excuse me 1 second. A little mac and cheese or something. Well, what we've got to do is get our arms around our arms around mandatory spending and entitlements. And what you do is very simple. You reform a lot of the entitlements to make them reflect contemporary times. Social Security. You have paid 6.2% of your income all your life for Social Security. Excuse me, you deserve that Social Security. We can't take it away, or we shouldn't take it away. But we got to reform it, because when Social Security originally passed, there was only 1 person in 15 living to age 65. Now almost everybody lives to age 65. My father-in-law is 98 years old, still collecting Social Security, and showing no signs of kicking the bucket. Franklin Roosevelt didn't know my father-in-law. But when Social Security got established, it was established for contemporary time. Times have changed. So we're going to have to change the formula by moving eligibility out. I became eligible at age 66 for my Social Security. In a couple years it goes to 67. We've got to make it go to 68, and then to age 69, and by 2075, probably to age 70. That's the eligibility, not the amount. Secondly, we might ought to look at our entitlement COLAs and the formulas for cost of living adjustments and how they're reflective. Maybe we ought to means test those COLAs to make sure they're fair and reflective. But we ought to put our arms around Social Security and reform it so it doesn't go broke and doesn't take our nation broke. Medicare is a whole different ballgame. You've paid 1.35% of your income for your entire working career since 1968 for Medicare, and you deserve it. But Medicare disappears in 2017, less than 4 years, because it is on an unsustainable course for us to be able to afford it, and it's going to take the country under. How you do that is going to be tough, and it's not going to be very popular. But if we do it now, we can save it for not just our lifetime, but for our children and grandchildren by doing the following. Any physicians in the room? If there are, correct me as I go through this. The biggest fallacy of Medicare is a fee-for-service reimbursement business, meaning you go to the doctor, he sends you a bill, it goes to Medicare, they pay it. If you go to the doctor 5 times, they pay 5 bills. You cannot control your cost having a fee-for-service reimbursement. What we've got to do is go to more of a Medicare Advantage program like you have today, but make it universal, where instead of the government paying for a reimbursement that they reduce every time you go to the doctor, give you premium support for a premium you buy for the policy of your choice, engage you in the coverage that you want, and give you your tax dollars back not in a reimbursement to a doctor for a fee-for-service, but in a supplemental payment for your insurance premium. That way government controls its cost, you get your money back, and you're re-engaged in the process of Medicare. Medicaid, which is aid and health care for the poor, we've got to do it on a block grant basis to the states. What happens right now is the federal government sends 65% of the money from Medicaid to the states. States pay 35%. The states regularly manage the program, but the states don't make the rules. The feds do. If the state's going to have to run the program, they ought to have control of the money, and you get it to them in a block grant. Let them decide eligibility. Let them decide accountability, and let them decide how that money's appropriated. And then with the rest of entitlements, you do what American business has had to do over the last 5. We've had a tough time. Recession's been tough. It's been difficult. We've had to look at a lot of things we do. Retirement, for example. Now, some of you in this room, anybody retired? Anybody on a defined benefit program where you have a defined benefit from your retirement? Anybody on a defined contribution program where you had a 401k or an IRA match with your government, with your company? The United States government's on a defined benefit program. Every federal employee has a defined benefit retirement plan. Most all of American business does not. Most all of American business has defined contribution, where they contribute to your 401k, but you're responsible for managing your money and planning for your future. The government ought to do that today. You can't take away the retirement plan of the past, but for people coming into the government in the future, it ought to be defined contribution. It ought to be the same thing for a lot of other programs we do, where we put people in charge of their future rather than dependent on the government for their future. That's the important key. I'm a compassionate person, and I know everybody in this room is compassionate as well. And I know the Catholic churches. I work closely with Catholic Relief all around the world, particularly in Africa. All of us believe in a safety net for the impoverished and the poor. But if you make that safety net better than a job, you're going to have a lot more impoverished and poor, and you're not going to have a vibrant economy. The safety net is to catch you and keep you from falling through the bottom. It's not to be an alternative to work, to plan and invest. And that's what's slowly but surely happening in the United States of America. Now, I can't back up what I'm about to tell you, but Tom Coburn from Oklahoma can. He did a study on all the federal benefits available to families in poverty and out of work, and came up with a number of $56,000 in eligibility every family of four has for federal programs if they're out of work and they're below the level of poverty. $56,000 is a lot of money. It's your tax money, and it's more than support for a safety net. It's an alternative to work and investment, and that's when we really get in trouble in our country. Now back to the budget we did for a second, because I pay very close attention to my constituencies. We've had some controversial debates like the health care bill, the Affordable Care Act, which goes into effect January 1st. One of the most controversial debates and difficult debates was between the President of the United States and the Catholic Church. The President of the United States wanted to mandate the coverage of contraception and health plans offered by business to conform with the American Affordable Health Care Act. The Catholic Church wanted to be able to exercise its conscience, and if it didn't believe in offering contraceptive coverage, not to offer it. Obama won. I didn't vote with him on it. None of my friends in the Republican conference voted on it. But this last Saturday morning, about 3 a.m., we got a chance to vote again, because Jeanne Shaheen put an amendment up to eradicate any social conscience or religious conscience provision on any contraception in the federal government. And she won. We didn't win, but we once again fought for the right for you to cherish your religious beliefs, your religious treasures. I'm sorry, I've just started losing it back in my nose. I apologize for talking. We stood up, I guess that's probably what it is, pollen and trees and azaleas, which, as cold as it is, I'm surprised we've got any of them. But religious liberty and conscience is very important. It's a framework of our country. Freedom of religion was one of the praying principles that we got in the Bill of Rights. A lot of people don't realize we couldn't pass the Constitution in Philadelphia until we first got the 10 Basic Bill of Rights, which became the first 10 amendments that allowed us to get enough votes to end up getting the Constitution passed. And freedom of religion was one of those principles that those that left England to come here for a better way of life wanted to insist on. We have to still fight for that religious liberty every single day in Washington, D.C., and I am committed to doing that. Now, there are a lot of other subjects I could talk about, but I said I was going to leave room for time, and we're getting towards 8 o'clock, so I want to leave some time and have you ask questions. And if you don't ask a question, I have a 45-minute boring speech I'm prepared to drop in the head. Yes, that guy, see, that gets a hand.